Oh, okay. Sorry I'm late. I blacked out and 6 months went by. So speaking of time passing and uneven lurches, I never got around to watching Anne with an E, just because I think someone told me it was like a children's show, so I just couldn't really vibe with that. And then quarantine came around and I was like, I've literally exhausted every other show that I usually watch over and over and over again. I'll look into it. And I mean, it is PG, but I would not describe it as a children's show. Could a kid watch it? Sure, but I think a lot of it would go over a child's head. And then also, there's still some scenes that are like troubling to watch. They're not super gory or sexual or anything, but it's still like, it's just a lot to wrap your mind around, even as an adult. But anyway, I got around to watching it finally and was addicted to it. I could think of nothing else but that show. Of course, I am a sucker for a good period piece, so maybe I have a bias in that. As long as they dress like that, I'm gonna watch what happens. Anyway, I of course, as always, have a lot of thoughts because I only ever think about things that are not super important or have any importance, period. But they consume my brain. Everything gets up here and I gotta put it somewhere or else it never leaves. This show will stick in my brain right here, all of my thoughts about it, until I throw them at you via a camera lens alone in my bedroom. It never goes away. It's like bees bouncing around. It'll never go away. But once I throw it out there, then I don't think about it anymore. I got clean slate, no thoughts, head empty. My skull is but a desert, and my brain is a tumbleweed. So I was going to separate this video into two sections, the pros and the cons of the show, but then there are some things that I want to talk about that I don't really know if they fall into pros or cons. They're just observations. I'm going to start with the pros, hit the observations, and then end on the cons. This video is absolutely saturated with spoilers, so if you want to avoid those, you're going to have to click off now. Pro number one, the one closest to my heart, Matthew Cuthbert. Good boy. Wholesome. I love him more than anything in this world. And boy, did Matthew love Anne right from the start. And they were both so good for each other, and I ate that up. She brought life back into that very gray, very sad house. Matthew was definitely struggling with some form of depression before Anne showed up. I think both him and Marilla were. He was solid and stable and trustworthy and constant, something that she has never had, not even a taste of before. He loved that little girl from the moment he met her. Matthew would die for Anne, and I would die for Matthew. Next, I think they did a great job demonstrating the very real issues that plagued people back then without sensationalizing them. They didn't need to be gory or super violent or sexual in order to get the point across that this was bad, this shouldn't happen ever. Here's an example of it, but I think they just handled it very classy. And I appreciate that so much because that's what so many other shows try to do and just miss it entirely. I think it's very important to show what people struggled with. For example, the sexism, the racism, the slavery. They were able to portray that without traumatizing the viewer all over again. And they tried to have some of those issues resolved in a sort of positive light because not everyone back in those days were completely corrupt and awful people. I mean, change did come about slowly, but people were working towards change. There were good people back then because we wouldn't be here if it weren't for good people trying to make things better. So they showed that with, Sebastian, Bash, and Gilbert and their friendship and how it didn't matter the color of the skin. Gilbert loved Bash and he wanted to be his friend, be his business partner, and Bash had to deal with a lot from the locals and he still had to deal with racism, but it still showed that there were very few, but still good people existed and were trying to help and trying to make a difference because it's people like Bash and Gilbert that brought along the change that needed to happen back then. Next, they did touch a lot on mental illness, but they of course never diagnosed anyone. There was never really therapy, but you do see it very obviously, especially in Anne, her 100% having PTSD and maladaptive daydreaming. I thought in the beginning that she might have had Asperger's. I could be wrong because obviously I can't freaking diagnose a character through TV screens. The way they portrayed her PTSD with the flashbacks that weren't completely overdone or anything, she would have good days and bad days. So even if she started to improve, she didn't just, okay, she's better now that she's adopted, all of her problems go away. Like, no, her problems are still there, very deeply rooted. Even after she's officially adopted by Matthew and Marilla, it didn't matter. She still had trauma to deal with. She still had attachment issues. She was told this is your permanent home, but she still always lived with fear that they could send her back if they didn't like her anymore. Throughout all the seasons, no matter how much support she got, she still had maladaptive daydreaming, low self-esteem, and insecure attachments. They got better. She learned ways to cope with them, but they didn't just disappear. The next pro is also a con later on, but I'm going to focus on the positives first. Rachel Lynde, her character development, because of course, I hated her. Ooh, I appreciate that even though she was terrible in the beginning, I couldn't stand her, I'll get to it, that they gave her a good character arc and she did eventually become a better person and a better friend. They used her as a character that would bully Anne and as a villain sort of in the beginning, but they didn't just toss her aside like, oh yeah, she is a terrible person. Anyway, moving on. We watch her learn. We watch her see the error of her ways. She was a part of the struggle that the early feminists had, where a lot of the arguing was just between the women. They couldn't seem to decide. Still, some of them had more conservative views than others, and it was them butting heads with each other. Well, not even with the men. Yes, with the men, but a lot of it within their own group. It wasn't a united front like a lot of our history books will teach us. It wasn't women linking arms and marching the streets together as one, we will fight for equality. It was, well, I want equality, but to me equality means this. Well, to me equality means this, and now we fight. I almost put this in the cons column because it pissed me off so much, but just because it made me angry doesn't mean it wasn't a good thing. The men in like the city council or whatever it was, the meeting that they would have where they made decisions for their town. Ooh, like, I wanted to rip my hair out. They made me so angry. They're exactly the kind of men you would expect. They had one woman on their council, and it was Rachel. And of course, they would dismiss everything she said, and they would interrupt her, and they would call her hysterical, or that she wasn't thinking logically. These men say women are too hysterical to make big decisions. And then those same men burned down a schoolhouse. The entire school. The only school for their children, because they got their feelings hurt from a newspaper written by children. Those crusty, dusty old men would not stand a chance. I could snap their bones like a carrot. This pro is also a con, but again, it's a good thing. And the only reason I would say it's a con is just because it made me angry, but it made me angry in a good way, because it's exactly what I would want, is the slow burn romance between Gilbert and Anne. It drags on for 27 episodes, 27 hours, essentially. It was absolutely excruciating, but the relief of finally seeing them get together in the end was completely worth it. It felt like I could finally breathe again. I think I held my breath all 27 episodes until the final end. I was like, oh my god, like, okay, all right, we made it, we did it. And last, but most certainly not least, is most of the episodes were directed by women, baby, and it shows. There's a reason this show has a nice little touch to it. Nice little artistic touch, nice gentle touch, the way they handled everything with feminism, very clearly written by women. Much appreciated, much love. There were a lot of things throughout the story since Anne is a girl and her growing up and learning about being a girl and then trying to get along with other girls and then turning into a woman, all of that. So beautifully done. Men could never, okay, section 2, observations. 1, Anne was dealing with PTSD and maladaptive daydreaming. I've already mentioned that. But what I wanted to touch on is how back then no one believed in that. People didn't care about children. They were just viewed as property. Clearly, because in the first few episodes, they keep debating sending Anne back because they wanted a boy. And the only reason they wanted a boy was just to have a farmhand to help work. They basically wanted a child slave. They didn't say those words because it doesn't sound as nice, but let's be honest, they didn't care to have an actual child to raise and love. They just wanted a farmhand. This, of course, only traumatizes Anne further because she already believes no one could ever love her or want her, and then she finally thinks someone might love her and want her, and then nope, it was a mistake. You were a mistake. Run along. Hello? Ooh, the way I wanted to choke Marilla out the first few episodes. I still harbor some ill will towards her. I needed an apology. I didn't need her to apologize to Anne. I need her to apologize to me for making me watch her treat Anne that way. Are you kidding me? Would it kill you to just show like a shred of kindness to this child? Anne's crying because she believes she's not worthy of love. You couldn't just give her a little pat on the... I'm not asking for a hug. Just a little pat on the back. Like, this touch-starved child, please. Ugh. Again, with me trying to diagnose people. I would like to think that some of them had some of these diagnoses just because it's interesting to see how those play out in a world where no one believed in that. Back then it was like, did you take a nap? Didn't work? Would you like some heroin? So I think Matthew Cuthbert showed some mild signs of Asperger's. Basically, I say this because of what I observed in his lack of social skills. He barely speaks, if ever. He doesn't make eye contact. He fidgets. He could just have overall social anxiety, and I'm reading too much into it. But even in his own home, he just seems like he doesn't know how to speak or connect or how to deal with when people show emotions. And then he cares about very specific things. And if you can get him to talk about that, he'll talk about it. But I don't know. I could be wrong. He could just be a man of very few words, but it's a little thought experiment. So these are cons. Most of them are not really hits towards the show. They're just things that I didn't like, but it doesn't mean that it makes the show any worse. It just means I didn't have fun watching these parts of the show. There is one thing towards the end that is an actual hit towards the show's production, but most of this is just my grievances with the characters. So I know Marilla had trouble accepting Anne because she wanted a boy and Anne wasn't a boy, and then she eventually was like, I guess we'll keep her because Matthew likes her. Like, she's not a dog. Just because Matthew got attached to her, you're like, okay, fine. But even after the adoption, boy, was that woman still cold towards Anne. That child was neglected her entire life. Would it kill you to be just like a smidge nicer to her? Also, like I said before, maybe, I don't know, hug the crying child who believes she's not worth loving because she's been touch-starved her entire life. For the love of God, anything. You wonder why Anne has these outbursts and feelings of inadequacy, and you're not helping by just completely ignoring her or just staring at her and then walking out of a room when Anne's uncomfortable. Something, anything. A crumb of affection, maybe. Also, like I said with Rachel Lynde, I wanted to choke her out. The audacity she had to speak to Anne the way she did in the beginning, just blatantly calling her ugly to her face. That's a child, ma'am. The last few episodes are so rushed, and I know that the show got canceled after season 3, but I don't think they were told while making season 3 that it was canceled, so this could just be poor writing on their part, and I feel very bad about saying that, but it's just true. If they did know the show was getting canceled, I would understand the quick wrap up. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. I've searched it online and I can't find out if they really knew before it aired. It seems like they didn't know before season 3 aired that they were going to get canceled. And so for that, I hold it over their head for how terrible season 3 ended. Diana's parents were dead set against her not going to college, did not budge. She was going to go to France for finishing school and then get married and that's it. Her father would not even breathe in the direction of college for her. And then one day she just rocks up to campus, father in tow, and all is well in the world. The worst one of them all is, what happened to Caquette? She was sent to boarding school and abused there by the nuns, and then she escapes, finally makes it home, and then they take her back. So her parents come along with Anne and Matthew to try to save their daughter, but of course, I don't know, for whatever reason, they won't let her out because, they were imprisoning those children. Anyway, did we just forget about that? The last thing we see is Caquette's parents just setting up camp outside the boarding school, and I know a happy ending is nearly impossible when it comes to atrocities committed towards the indigenous people back then, but not even an update? We know history likes to forget about these people, but we sure won't. No? We're just gonna forget about them again? Again, I understand the show was canceled, but anything. 30 seconds, give me something to just let me know what happened there. In summation, I loved the show. I genuinely loved it. It made me laugh, it made me cry. I was on the edge of my seat with suspense. I think it's incredible. I think it's really well done. I loved the way they touched on very serious subjects, but I also just loved the characters and I loved the world that they lived in and the way the world was crafted. I think it's great storytelling. I loved that women were involved in the production and the making of the show. I appreciate that it was PG so that if I wanted to watch it with a kid that I could, and it would help open their eyes to some very real things, but also I don't know if I would, because especially Anne's flashbacks could get a little troubling, at least to me. A lot of shows think they have to go big to really drive a point home and nearly traumatize their viewers, and this show shows that you absolutely do not. They did it perfectly, in my humble opinion. They were able to convey the emotion of the atrocities more than they needed to show a visual. Does that make any sense? It's about the vibes. I loved Matthew's character and the way that we got to see him grow and blossom as life was brought back into his home, and the same with Marilla. We got to see her soften up a little bit, but also be a very strong female role model for Anne in a lot of ways. Anyway, that's all I got. Thank you for watching. I also Twitch stream. If you want to check out my Twitch, links are down below. Same with enamel pins. This is what they look like. I'm trying to get rid of them. They're limited edition. I'm never getting more of them. I'm over it. I'm sick of them. Someone please take them. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
My foot in my mouth